Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our latest Tuesday edition of Real Estate Tidbits. As always, hope everyone's doing well. And it's a killer of a day heat-wise. So, stay out of the sun when you can, stay hydrated, and use plenty of tanning block. Today is going to be 110% unscripted show. Normally, I'm pretty unscripted anyway. For those of you that listen regularly, I try to make it more topical, and I don't really have a predetermined script. I don't have a teleprompter like a lot of our infamous politicians. Sometimes I'll have an outline of a couple topics I want to cover just to keep me on point. But today is 100% not that way. I had some things I was going to go over today that I thought would have been good topics, but just through some events that took place today, my mind works in mysterious ways sometimes. Of course, my wife always says I'm a little bit off center, but sometimes things just happen that lead themselves into things that I think would be interesting to chat about and for you guys to listen to. The main thing is that I think they'd be interesting to chat about because I do this podcast really for three reasons. Number one, I want to provide a service to people so that hopefully they're getting useful information. Number one, about real estate, and number two, about life issues that we talk about. Secondly, I do it because I enjoy it. I'm one of these people that likes talking at certain times of the day. And as you know from listening to my show up to this point, and we are going to change that, I've never had any guests on there. It's always been myself pontificating about different issues of the day or things that I felt are relevant. So I enjoy talking about them. I enjoy doing these podcasts. Hopefully they're beneficial to people. I don't seek out advertisers. I make no money off this. This is strictly a labor of love, for lack of a better term. Probably you'd say I sound like an idiot for just chatting and doing things and having no return on investment, but I like doing it. And hopefully maybe I'll gain a customer or two out of this. They'll hear me chat and say, that's a realtor that I think could do a great job on my behalf. Or he just sounds like a pretty interesting guy. I'd like to meet him and chat with him. And, when you hire a realtor, I always tell my customers, it's like a short-term marriage. Well, what do I mean by a short-term marriage? Well, there's two types of customers in residential real estate. There's potential sellers and there's potential buyers. So in either category, you're having to make a decision and hiring an agent. And as I mentioned during my last podcast last week, you should be focusing on hiring the agent and not the company they're with, because 99% of the time you get a great agent. It doesn't matter who they're affiliated with. You're going to be happy with their performance. You get a mediocre agent, regardless of how good the company is, and you're not going to be happy with the performance. So what do I mean by a short-term marriage? Well, you're actually signing a contractual agreement that says you're employing this agent for a predetermined amount of time to accomplish the following objectives. If you're a seller, you're hiring the realtor to sell your property. You're agreeing on a market price. The realtor is telling you exactly what he feels or she feels are the best things that are going to sell your house for the best price in the shortest amount of time possible. At least in my case, I tell you what you should expect, mistakes we want to avoid, things that are going to benefit you. I go over market trends, timing, negotiating recommendations, all those things before we ever hit the market, because I want you to know as much about the process as I can communicate to you. From a buyer's standpoint, it's similar, but on an opposite part of the desk, especially with the new real estate laws that took effect about a year ago. Now the buyers have to contractually hire the agent. And then, of course, in that agreement, it specifies the type of house they're expecting, the price points that they're looking for, the geographic areas they're looking for. In both agreements, how long the agreement's going to take place for, that both parties agreed to. You know, some agents may want to have a forever agreement. Other customers, like buyer or seller, may want to have the shortest agreement. And in order to be fair, you've got to look at all the variables and come up with terms that are agreeable to both sides. You know, I've always worked under the premise of a win-win situation, and I've always adhered to do that. It's got to be, I got to feel good about the relationship. I've got to feel that the terms are fair to me. At the same token, my customer has to feel good, that it's a fair agreement for them and that they feel good about it. If one of the two sides don't feel it's an equitable relationship, then it's not going to be a successful relationship. And when I say you're kind of like entering into a marriage where you're working close at hand with the agent for the amount of time it takes for the agent to accomplish your objective. So whether that's 45 days, 90 days, 180 days, whatever the case may be, you're kind of joined at the hip with that agent. So in my case, I can only tell you a few things that come into play in that relationship. Number one, whatever I tell you I'm going to do, I do. I don't make any promises that I can't perform in. Number two, I guarantee you that you're going to be tired of hearing from me because I give you a lot of communication. Regardless of whether your property is busy or not busy, I'm going to communicate to you, keep you fully apprised of things, try to be proactive if we need to make any modifications in our strategies. If you're a purchaser, once we've had a chance to get a little bit better acquainted and we've looked at a few properties, I'll tell you if I feel your expectations are realistic. Sometimes I'll work with a prospective buyer that they gave me a list from A to Z with a price point, and it's just not realistic. They're either going to have to do one of three things. Number one, they're going to have to scale back on the criteria that they're expecting. Number two, they're going to have to expand their price point. Or number three, they may have to slightly amend their location. Maybe somebody wants to have the nicest lake. They want to be in the most exclusive area, but they don't have the budget to afford that. So it's also my job to impart a little bit of reality to my customer. And that's a very delicate situation. I try to do it in a diplomatic fashion, but it's my job to tell people what I think is realistic and what's truthful. I try not to sugarcoat things, and I don't give them a pie-in-the-sky scenario. It's like when you deal with a salesman on a high-ticket item, not in real estate. They're going to yes sir you to death. They're going to make a lot of representations, but frequently they're doing what's called salesman's puffing, and they make a lot of representations that are just not going to occur. So when you're listening to that particular salesperson, you have to decide if they're blowing a lot of smoke or if they're giving you tangible information that you can verify as a realistic outcome for that. So what brings me to this point and how we're going into this conversation today were a couple events that took place today with me personally, real estate-wise. So the first thing was I had an appointment this morning that we had made about 5 days ago with a prospective seller. And this seller, we had a nice conversation on the telephone. They gave me a little information about their situation. And it was clear that they really weren't ready to put their house on the market yet, regardless of anything that transpired in our communication. So they were willing to just have a telephone conversation with me and or me share some email data with them. But I suggested, which they readily agreed to, that I would be glad to do a face-to-face visit with them. and go over various points of information, answer their questions, go over the process in detail, go over marketing or pricing strategy, tell them what my recommendations would be, go over what fees they could expect in a real estate sales process, and try to answer all of their questions for them. And then we proceed from there as whatever happened would happen. So we did meet this morning. It was a very informative conversation. I think that hopefully they enjoyed the information that I imparted with them. I tend to probably tell people more than they expect to hear because I want my consumers to be informed consumers and not say that they had no idea that this potential outcome could occur. So not that I can predict 100% of things, but I try to minimize unexpected topics from happening. So we spent a lot of time today on market trends, comparable sales, how you compare property A to B, C, and D, how appraisers actually operate in the 21st century and how they changed about 10 to 15 years ago in terms of the transparency of appraisals. Things that could go wrong in a possible contract setting, and kind of the ways that I try to oversee and manage the process and make sure that we come to a successful conclusion in an expeditious fashion for a premium price on behalf of that seller. And normally if the seller goes along with what I say, we usually have a result similar to what I had explained to them. I pride myself, if somebody hires me, that I'm going to be successful in selling their house. And I very, very, very rarely have a seller that hires me that we don't sell their house unless it's an unusual situation or we're in such a depressed market that in order to move a property, we either have to get lucky or the sellers have to take a beating on their property. And sometimes the sellers, are not in a financial position where they need to do that. But I try not to take listings that I don't feel good about. And so, I'm going to go out on appointments periodically where the seller wants a price much higher than I feel their house warrants. And I may be the bearer of bad news and give them my opinion and understand that it varies so much from their opinion that A, they may not hire me because either they don't agree with me or they just don't want to hear what I'm telling them. Or B, they will find a broker that'll list the property for the higher price that I don't feel is realistic. And ultimately what ends up happening if they overprice it, as I mentioned in one of last week's topics, the house isn't going to sell. They'll either go through a series of price reductions, they'll fire that agent, or if it ultimately sells, it'll sell for significantly less than it would have sold for. And I'm tying that in to my second interaction today. And so I chatted with another broker today who's a top-notch broker, not with my company, and we were just chatting about real estate in general and sharing some perspectives of the market and kind of some operating methodologies and such. And this broker happened to mention that in the marketplace that she does a lot of business in, approximately 30 to 40% of the listings are not selling. They're either expiring or being withdrawn. So what that means in real estate parlance is that a customer hires an agent or a broker. They list the property. It's on the market for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever the timeline is. And it ultimately doesn't sell and it's removed from the market. So what has happened in that situation? Well, the seller is unhappy because it didn't sell and they couldn't go on to the next plan of their real estate life. B, the listing broker, if they're a creditable person, spent money and time marketing the property And, time is money. And I know myself, my time is my most valuable entity. There's only so many hours in the day that I'm going to work. I want to allow enough time to spend time with my family. I want to allow enough time for a little downtime. So there's no benefit to me or the seller in that scenario occurring. But yet in that particular market, that is occurring. And it's an area that is not a bad market by any means. It's a pretty, what I would call affluent area. So what that tells me is a few things, just from, even if I didn't know the area. Number one, why is that area having such a high percentage of houses unsuccessfully selling? Well, probably it's one of three reasons. Number one, a lot of the properties are overpriced. Number two, there's more sellers than buyers out there. And number three, a lot of the sellers are just unrealistic. And again, as we chatted about last week, I mentioned that a lot of people still think it's 2022 or 23, and they're not pricing and marketing homes according to 2025 criteria. And that's crucial. In my opinion, you're always 100% better in not taking a customer's listing under that scenario than overpricing it and having it sit for the reasons that I just alluded to. But there's a lot of agents that don't agree with me and will do that anyway. There's a popular area that I'll mention on this podcast in Lake Nona. And Lake Nona primarily has the 32827, 32832 zip codes. And it's a popular area. It's got a very good reputation overall in terms of the education level, the school systems, the lifestyle, the focus more on health. Most of the people that move to Lake Nona are upwardly mobile income-wise. So there's a lot of reasons why people like moving there. But when I compare Lake Nona to some of the other areas that I do a lot of research in and business in, they have a much higher percentage of listings that don't sell out there, especially with certain agents. Now, they're not in the 30 to 40% range, but they're definitely noticeably different than a lot of the areas that I work in. And especially there's a few different agents, and some of the agents out there are high-profile agents that I'm alluding to. So it's obvious to me, without having a conversation with a couple of those agents that I'm referencing, that they want to be collectors. And what I mean by collectors are they just want to have as many listings as possible. And their modus operandi may be they'll get a lot of leads from those listings. Their name will be out there on all these signs. So when people think of selling their home, they're going to contact that agent because they figure that agent must be selling a ton of stuff out there, and that agent must know what they're doing. Or they want to generate leads from their yard signs. They get a call on an overpriced listing, so the customer's not interested in that listing, but then they say, "Hi, Mr. Buyer. If you're not working with an agent, I would love to show you and sell you something else. I'm quite knowledgeable in Lake Nona. I pretty much know most of the houses for sale out here. I can certainly find you the best values that meet your criteria. Why don't we have a chat and see how we can better assist one another?" So that could be a reason. Or they could be an office that also does a fair amount of property management, and they can always turn these $1 million listings, $750,000 listings, $1.5 million listings into high-priced rental properties. And, of course, the broker makes a good fee on managing rental properties. And if the seller doesn't need to sell their property, well, the rental yields are a lot higher than they used to be. So it'll be a good consolation for the seller if they get a rental property and can afford to hold on to it for a few years without pulling the equity out of their house. So there's a lot of reasons why that could occur with that particular agent or two. But when I see that agent's name or two, I immediately have a lower opinion of that agent. And that agent may do a lot more business than me. And maybe that system works for that agent in terms of them fulfilling their income objectives. But that doesn't mean they're serving the interest of their customers well. And anybody can put signs out there. When I tell sellers, if you're hiring me to sell your property. You're not hiring me just to put a sign out there so you can tell people your house is for sale. And so I can brag to people, hey, I've got 30 listings right now. I always take the approach, it's quality, not quantity. You know, just like their real estate offices, and they've always been in operation, sometimes more significantly than others. And I'm not going to mention names because I never do. Some companies are continually recruiting agents, and they want to maintain a high agent count at all times. So they want to be able to say, yeah, we've got 200 agents, we've got 300 agents, whatever the reasons may be. And, you know, they work on a numbers game. So if they hire, let's say they hire 20 agents, maybe they hope that 4 of them are successful. Well, that to me is not an effective way to own or manage an office. If you're going to hire 20 agents, you want the majority of them to be successful and maintain a relationship with your company. Anybody can kind of throw darts against the wall and hope a few of them stick. But there are companies out there that are well-known companies that's their MO. And they were not companies that I would want to ever own. I think I mentioned in a few podcasts, I used to own 2 different companies. The last one that I sold years ago was a Century 21. And at the time I sold it, it was doing quite well. And it was the number 2 Century 21 in all of Central Florida at that time. And the reason that I sold it primarily was I was stretching myself too thin. I had younger children, and I was always a hands-on owner. So I did, recruiting, interviewing, training. I also did personal sales. If we had a customer that had an issue with one of my agents, I would have to get involved and assist in that. So I stayed pretty busy. And of course, as I mentioned in last week's podcast, I do take calls after hours frequently. So I was, my kids at that time, I had an infant and I had a son that was just starting elementary school. So I just felt I was pulling myself too thin. Now, one option would have been to delegate a lot of these responsibilities, but I guess I was kind of anal and I hadn't reached that mentality where I wanted to have my name on the door, but not really be actively involved in the business. So I chose to sell the business, and I think in hindsight it was a very good decision. I probably, if I'd continued to own it for a few more years, would have built it up even larger, and I would have made more money, but I would have taken away from my family structure. And at that time, I had about 50 agents, which was a good size. It wasn't huge, but it was a good size. And out of those 50 agents, almost all of them produced business, because I took personal pride into hiring the right kind of folks and hopefully making sure that they were successful, because I took that as a badge of honor with me, that I wasn't going to bring people in unless I felt they had the characteristics to be successful and that my program could help them be successful. And I was able to do that. And so I still maintain some relationships with some of those agents, years later. In fact, I've got a few people that are licensed with the company I'm with now, indirectly because I'm here. So hopefully they would speak well of me if somebody asked them how their experience with me went. So anyway, I hope that wasn't too much of a ramble today. Like I said, this was completely unscripted. Hopefully it gives you a little bit better insight into situations, ethics, what's the best way to work with customers, and how we do business in the 21st century. One of the things that you've heard me talk about over the months that it's been over a year now that we've been on this podcast, is that there's not enough facts that go on in our country. There's too much, for lack of a better term, BS. People are not held accountable frequently enough. You need to be accountable. If you're going to tell people things, you need to be able to back it up, and you need to be able to do your best to accomplish it. So anyway, that's all for today. Have a great rest of the week. Stay hydrated. We'll see you on Friday. This is Marty Kaiser out.